Welcome to today's explainer. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder how humanity made this incredible leap? I mean, going from literally measuring the world with our bare hands to using the super rigorous, universally agreed upon scientific methods we have today? Well, that's exactly what we're going to uncover. We're tracing this fascinating journey from early local measurement tricks to the highly structured investigations that literally help us to code the universe. Get ready, because we are diving right into the basics of scientific investigation. Okay, let's dive into our agenda for this unit. First up, indigenous methods of measurement. Then, standardizing science with SI units. Third, accuracy versus precision. And finally, we'll pull it all together with the scientific method. Basically, we're going to master the tools of scientific measurement first, and then learn how to actually do scientific investigations. All right, Section 1, Indigenous Methods of Measurement. We're grounding science in human history here. Long before anyone had digital scales or, laser thermometers, people still had to trade goods, build homes, and keep time. So, indigenous measurements are basically these incredibly practical methods that locals used for generations to just navigate daily life. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they did it. Before you could just go buy a standard ruler, people used the most readily available tool they had, their own bodies. It's actually kind of genius. You've got the hand span, which is just measured from the tip of the little finger to the stretched thumb. The digit is literally just the width of an adult guy's fingertip. And the cubit, that's the distance from the tip of the elbow right to the tip of the middle finger. Super resourceful, right? But hold on, think about this for a second. Let's say we're using the foot, literally the distance from the back of your heels to your big toe. Well, what happens when my foot is way bigger than yours? Or what if my arm span is a lot longer? You can instantly see the massive flaw here, right? Sure, these indigenous measurements were super accessible, but they totally lacked consistency. If we're trying to build a house together or trade grain, a cubit that randomly changes size depending on who's measuring is going to cause absolute chaos. We definitely needed a better unified system. Which perfectly brings us to Section 2, Standardizing Science with SI Units, moving to a universal system. See, for the global scientific community to actually collaborate, they realized they needed to speak the exact same language. No more guessing. So they solved this whole inconsistency problem by adopting the International System of Units, or SI for short. So the crucial point here is that scientists finally agreed on 4 fundamental quantities. These serve as the absolute rock-solid base for all modern scientific measurement. For length, the universal standard is the meter. For mass, it's the kilogram. Time is locked in at seconds, and temperature is in Kelvin. We call these fundamental units because they don't depend on anything else. They are the foundation of literally everything else we measure. But wait, if those are the fundamental quantities, how on earth do we measure stuff like speed or area? Well, we use what are called derived quantities, and they're exactly what they sound like. They are mathematically derived or combined from those base units we just talked about. For example, you can't just measure area directly with a single fundamental unit. You actually have to multiply a length by a width, so meters times meters, and boom, you get the derived unit of square meters. Same thing with speed, which is just distance divided by time, giving us meters per second. Now, knowing the units is great and all, but actually capturing them accurately, that requires standardized tools. Today, modern instruments have completely replaced the handspan and the old shadow clocks. We use precisely calibrated rulers to capture that exact meter, and highly accurate analog and digital clocks to capture the exact duration of a single second. Because of this, a meter in a lab here is exactly the same as a meter in a lab halfway across the planet. Moving right along to Section 3, Accuracy versus Precision, hitting the mark in measurement. Okay, so now that we have our standardized units and tools, we really need to look at the quality of our measurements. These are 2 completely distinct, absolutely vital concepts in science that, honestly, get mixed up in everyday conversation all the time. Let's tackle accuracy first. Accuracy is simply a measure of how close your measurement is to its true accepted value. It's like asking, did I hit the target? For example, let's say you have a standard weight, and you know for an absolute fact that it is exactly 10 kilograms. If you pop that on a scale and it reads 8.2 kilograms, yeah, your measurement is just not accurate. You missed the known value by a mile. Now let's move to our next concept and see how this builds. Precision. Precision is all about how close 2 or more measurements are to each other, completely regardless of whether they're actually accurate. This is wild. Going back to our 10-kilogram weight, if you weigh it 5 times and you get 3.2, 3.1, 3.25, 3.3, and 3.2 kilograms, well, your measurements are incredibly precise because they are all tightly clustered together. But they are still completely inaccurate because they're nowhere near that 10-kilogram mark. If that still feels a little abstract, just picture a dartboard, okay? A board where all your darts are tightly clustered right smack in the bullseye. That is both accurate because you hit the target and precise because the darts are close together. Now imagine another board where your darts are tightly grouped, but they're way off in the corner, far from the bullseye. That is highly precise, but absolutely not accurate. And what if the darts are just scattered all over the place? Well, sadly, that is neither accurate nor precise. Okay, so we've totally explored the evolution of measurement. We have these awesome standardized tools, and we know exactly how to check if our measurements are accurate and precise. But here's the thing, just owning a perfect ruler doesn't magically turn you into a scientist. So this brings us to a huge question. How do we actually use these tools to investigate the world around us? To answer that, we arrive at Section 4, the scientific method, a process of learning about the world. This is it, the structured, step-by-step process of learning about the universe through observation, inquiry, and some really rigorous testing. Now, what's really interesting about this is the structure. The scientific method isn't just some boring, straight-line checklist. If you follow the arrows here, you'll see it's actually a cyclical journey. It's a loop. If your analysis shows that your hypothesis was totally wrong, the process doesn't just end in failure. No way. It points you right back to trying again, forming a brand new hypothesis based on exactly what you just learned. It's a continuous, never-ending leap of discovery. Let's just concisely run through these core phases. First, you ask questions based on something you observed, like, why did that happen? Next, you do background research, so you aren't just starting from scratch. Step 3 is absolutely crucial. Establish a hypothesis. This is basically your tentative, logical explanation, but the key is that it absolutely must be testable. Then you head into the lab or the field to actually test the hypothesis with a fair experiment. After that, you analyze the results and draw a conclusion. And finally, and this is vital, you communicate results so other people can verify your work. Let's look at a really classic, simple way to apply this. Say we ask the question, is air necessary for a candle to burn? Well, our hypothesis might be, yes, air is definitely required. So to test this, we light a candle. It burns perfectly fine sitting there in the open air. Then we take an inverted glass jar and completely cover the candle. We observe that after just a short time, the flame completely dies out. So we analyze that result, and we conclude that the candle consumed all the available oxygen. Therefore, air is indeed necessary for combustion. Boom, science! Now, I know it's super easy to look at that candle experiment and think science is just the strict thing that only happens with fancy lab equipment. But the real beauty of the scientific method is that it applies universally. It totally bridges the gap between those strict laboratory experiments and our everyday local culture. I mean, it literally applies to everything, even dinner. Take, for example, making traditional injera. You can actually apply the rigorous scientific method right there in your kitchen. You can investigate procedures using local, everyday materials. Ask yourself, what happens if you change the fermentation time of the batter? That right there is your hypothesis. You test it by cooking up a batch. Then you analyze the texture, you taste it, and you communicate your results to whoever is lucky enough to be eating with you. The kitchen is literally just a laboratory where you get to eat your experiments. How cool is that? And that brings us to a final provocative thought. We've traced this incredible journey from measuring things with our bare hands to adopting universal SI units to ensuring our data is actually accurate and precise, and finally to mastering the entire scientific method. You now possess the fundamental framework for investigating reality itself. So my question to you is this: which everyday process in your life are you going to investigate using the scientific method next? Seriously, look around you. The whole world is just waiting to be measured, tested, and understood. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.